Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
What do you do as a parent when your child is sick and all you really want to do is to take care of them and make them well again? Now, what happens if their illness actually doesn't have a diagnosis and there is no hope of any cure? And what if people think it's in your child's head and that they're just imagining it? In 2010, when my daughter was 14 years old, she started waking up and going to bed with sore throats and an aching body. She was totally exhausted when she woke up in the morning and sometimes slept for 12 to 15 hours, and upon waking would feel no better afterwards. This went on for many months. Sometimes in the middle of the day she'd start to feel better and went to school if she was up to it, but then was usually feeling so unwell and exhausted when she returned home she'd go to bed. If she was too tired and couldn't get out of bed, she'd miss a day of schooling or whatever activity she had planned for that day or night. There were no other real symptoms. Now, I started to wonder if I was actually being too sympathetic and a bit of a pushover, because I can be sometimes when it comes to illness. However, as a mother or a parent, it's really important that you go with your gut instinct. And I went with mine. She was genuinely unwell. Now, what really clarified her illness for me was when I took her to see a doctor in the morning, who looked at her throat, diagnosed that she had a very red and raw sore throat, and gave her 3 days off school to get better. Feeling validated, we went home. By that night, she started to feel better and went to school, and then was sick again. It was tough for her. Her friends judged her. Well, wouldn't you? It looked as if she was just having a sleep-in and then coming to school late, and of course, she appeared well again. We went to see another doctor and described the symptoms to her, and she lectured Cassie on eating well and told her she had to get out and exercise, and basically that it was all in her head and she just needed to get over it. Cassie walked out. She was furious. She said she didn't believe me and I never want to go back to her again. I agreed, and we never returned to that doctor. We found ourselves a warm, sympathetic, intuitive doctor who sympathised and agreed with my diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. There's so little information around about CFS at the time. She did send us to the only person in our city who was doing research in this area. He was researching diabetes and chronic fatigue syndrome and the correlation of tiredness of both diseases. He was a bit of a nutty professor who gave us a lecture on cellular activity, which blew our non-scientific minds, so we just smiled and nodded as he spoke. The outcome of this discussion was that recent research, this was in 2011, was showing that diabetes caused tiredness and fatigue, similar to that of CFS. We walked away not much wiser, but happier to be heard and not dismissed. However, the results of the blood tests that Cassie had due to this consult showed that she was on the verge of type 2 diabetes, and that she'd also had glandular fever and other viruses that we hadn't known about before. We took the sugars out of her diet, and within 3 months she was able to function in a more normal way. Since then, Cassie's had to monitor her exercise, her nightlife, work schedules to work with her lack of energy, sore throats and exhaustion, which appear when she's overdone life. 5 years ago we were on a holiday and she had a relapse. She was so unwell, sore and exhausted that I had to almost carry her down to have breakfast in the hotel. She spent much of the holiday lying on the couch. When I got home, I decided to look for something else. You know, when you're desperate and you search sometimes, you sometimes find help in unexpected places. I found a company called Cultured Wellness, who are one of the pioneers of gut health and the microbiome in Australia. She had her gut microbiome tested and was found to only have one good gut bacteria, where there should have been at least 20. The next 6 months, she, and the rest of the family, followed a strict diet for building gut health, and since then she hasn't had any major relapses. This was another step forward for her physical well-being. This was not a cure, just something that helped Cassie. She was now coping well with everyday living. As an adult, she now recognises the symptoms that occur when she overdoes life, such as extreme fatigue, sore throats, and sometimes headaches. She hates it, but she recognises she has to really listen to her body and rest. She's one of the fortunate few who's not bedridden and is now able to function, well, most of the time, in the real world. ME/CFS has been recognised as a disease rather than a psychological malaise. It's a multifaceted, incapacitating disease that affects many parts of the body, including the brain and muscles, as well as the digestive, immune and cardiac system. ME is classified as a neurological disorder by the World Health Organization. This disease affects men, women and children of all ages and ethnicities. Today we're talking to Anne Wilson, CEO of Emerge Australia, which is a national patient organisation providing education, advocacy, research and support services for people living with ME/CFS. Anne is an experienced Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director with a diverse track record of restructuring, repositioning and growing organisations to meet stakeholder needs while attracting investment for financial sustainability and growth. With a passion for stakeholder engagement and working collaboratively to achieve business outcomes, Anne is committed to increasing awareness, investment and improved services and support for those with ME/CFS in Australia. Hi Anne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm really interested in what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to talk about ME/CFS and more recently the advent of long COVID. Now, ME/CFS has been recognised as a disease rather than a psychological malaise. Can you tell me what is ME/CFS and why is it no longer just CFS?
Okay, first of all, the disease is myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome, which is ME/CFS, as it's known for short. It's a very complex and disabling disease that affects many parts of the body, including the brain, the muscles, as well as the digestive, immune and cardiac systems, amongst others. It's a disease that is pretty unique in the impact it has on individuals. So that means that it will impact people in different ways. So not everybody presents with the same sets of symptoms, and clearly in terms of management and treatment, there is no one size fits all.
So why wasn't it recognised earlier in the piece as being, an actual illness? I know that when my daughter had it, nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody had any idea, and it was more, she was told it was in her head. So why is there suddenly such a greater interest around it?
Well, I don't think it's sudden.
No.
The World Health Organization classified chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME/CFS, as a disease way back in 1969, I believe. So it's been classified by the World Health Organization for a long time. I think it's never been classified as an issue of being a psychological disorder only. However, in the absence of proper diagnostic markers and in the inability of the medical profession to provide answers for patients who present with this complex array of symptoms, in the past, there have been many clinicians who, like your daughter, have been told that this is something that is more psychological and therefore they should seek some form of psychological support. And that feeds into the enormous stigma that sits around this condition that would indicate it's not real. You're not really experiencing this. Might have something to do with your mental health rather than your physical health. Well, of course, we know that it's got everything to do with your physical health, because more and more information and data is becoming known about ME/CFS. And therefore, the stigma has to be removed.
It does. And I mean, my daughter's grandmother did refer to it as the lazy person's disease when she was talking about it once. So there isn't a lot of awareness out in the general community either. I don't think about this disease a lot more now, but there wasn't back when I was looking at it. It wasn't that long ago. So with it, what is there? There is no cure, obviously. So what are the things that are being done through research at the moment to try and find some kind of way of helping these people?
Well, there's research happening all over the world. I mean, in my organisation at Emerge Australia, we are working with La Trobe University. We have a biobank where we're collecting bloods of people with ME/CFS to try to identify the molecular signature of ME/CFS that would hopefully lead to the discovery of a biomarker that could then lead to the potential of identifying a test that could be easily implemented in primary care to diagnose. Having said that, we are one of hundreds of labs around the world that are looking at trying to discover exactly the same thing. And, there's research going on into finding a treatment, into finding, obviously, a cure, into identifying a biomarker, to identifying if there is a clinical test that can be used easily. So there's millions of dollars being poured into research. Having said that, there's not enough money being poured into research. ME/CFS has really been a disease that has been forgotten, and the patients have been forgotten. Here in Australia, we would say that our health system has hugely failed people with ME/CFS. We have the majority of our general practitioners who don't have a clue about what they should do with a patient who comes in with this array of complex, debilitating symptoms. We have about 60,000 people in Australia who are bedbound or housebound, and many of them are like that because they've been to their doctor and their doctor says, I don't know what to do. And, you go to a doctor and you go to see your GP for hope. You go, for a diagnosis. You go to get a prescription. You don't go to being told, we haven't got an answer to this. And you can imagine the psychological impact that has on patients who come home absolutely empty, thinking there's no one on this planet that can help me. And what I'm experiencing is very real. It's not in my head. The fact that I can't get out of bed and stand up without falling over because my heart rate goes up and my blood pressure drops, that's not made up. The fact that I get out of bed and can only walk a few meters to the toilet and then come back to bed and have to sleep for another day because I haven't got the strength to do anything else, that's not made up. But these are the things that you're alluding to that have fed into the stigma of, you must be imagining this. It must be all in your head because we don't have any functional test to prove that what you're saying is true. Well, that's not the case. These days doctors can test orthostatic intolerance, postural orthostatic intolerance, or POTS, is one of the major areas of ME/CFS that so many people experience. Post-exertional malaise, is for many the diagnostic marker that GPs should be testing for when a patient goes and presents with this array of symptoms that don't easily fall into any one category.
We hear about happy, cohesive, productive teams, but do they exist, or are they a figment of a manager's imagination? Well, yes, they do, and I can help you make this happen. If you're ready to get your team working as one, contact me at thepersonalitycoach.com.au. So are you updating GPs on this? Like, is that part of your creating awareness as well?
Yes. So Emerge Australia, so last year we had a federal election, and prior to the federal election we put out a report called State of the Nation, because people with ME/CFS matter. And that's because people with ME/CFS have told us that they don't matter and no one cares. So we're putting that right up there, centre of everything that we do. And we put in our manifesto to government what we have worked out to be our organisational goals for the next 5 years. And those goals are GP and clinical education. It's not just GP education, it's also allied health education. The development of an optimal care pathway so that clinicians can refer to the community sector like Emerge Australia for patient support, because we can't expect a GP within the confines of their relatively short consultations to be able to provide all of the psychosocial support, all of the supports necessary to assist people to get disability support pensions onto the NDIS, etc. So we need a referral mechanisms to make GPs feel confident that when they refer their patients with ME/CFS to the community sector, they're going to get the right kind of assistance. The third major area, which is our priority, is for Australia to have updated clinical guidelines. Our clinical guidelines have not been updated since 2002, and that is an absolute disgrace. There are a number of people, including Emerge Australia, who are currently lobbying the federal government in our pre-budget submissions for funding for the development of updated clinical guidelines for ME/CFS. We do biomedical research, so one of the things that we wish to do is to add a long COVID biobank to our existing ME/CFS biobank so that we can cross-match bloods of people with long COVID against people with ME/CFS and compare them to people who don't have either condition, to see if we can really clarify that molecular signature that might then help to lead towards, a biomarker, which the rest of the world is looking at doing. And finally, our work in advocacy on changing the definition of disability for the NDIS, and also ensuring that the barriers to entry for people with ME/CFS are removed from accessing disability support payments and payments that other people seem to have no difficulty accessing. So there are 5 priorities that are published. They're online. Both political parties in Australia, all political parties in Australia, have access to both our pre-budget submission and our State of the Nation report.
Wow. And so important. Like you say, look, I've watched much footage about people with ME/CFS and their lives of their carers as well, because once they get sick and they're in bed, they basically have to be cared for by someone, and it's usually a family member as well, obviously. And like you say, here in Australia, there's nothing covering that. There's no services available for them, and it's the National Disability, what's the scheme?
Insurance scheme.
Yes. So for people listening that don't understand, that's what it is. So, and people with disabilities are getting a lot of care and a lot of service from that scheme, but these people are unable to get out of bed, and so that's a fantastic application that you're making, because it, honestly, I don't know whether, if anyone is listening, then go and have a look at these people and the footage that's out there around it, because nobody is really aware. I go and look because I'm interested and I kind of know about it. But I think it's so important what Emerge is doing is making it something that people will be talking about, because did you say this? You didn't say it, but on your website, 250,000 people in Australia affected by ME/CFS.
Yeah, they're impacted in one way or the other. They're either carers or they're patients. And the cost to the economy is $14.5 billion annually. And, that is because, like with a lot of illnesses, and I alluded to this before, if you've got ME/CFS and if you're severe or moderate to severe, you may have had to give up work, you may have had to give up schooling, you may have had to give up university. You might be a mum with 3 children who can no longer care for your children. You've lost your livelihood, you've lost your identity. Is it any wonder that you end up with depression, suicidal thoughts, mental health issues? It's not the mental health issues that are causing you to feel that way. It is the disease that you've got that is the underlying disease that is causing all of your mental health issues. And that's the paradigm that we are fighting to shift. And I think it has shifted. And the same can be said of graded exercise therapy. There's this big outcry in the world of ME/CFS about how dreadful graded exercise therapy is and how, it has damaged so many people who've had it, which is true. It is fact. The reality is that learning to move and do movements within your energy envelope, not called graded exercise therapy, but called using your muscles, even if you're bedbound. Being able to circle your ankles while you're lying in bed, being able to flex your arms while you're lying in bed. Any little bit of movement you can do to keep your muscles supple, that's not exercise. That's just trying to keep parts of your body as fit as you can keep them, but only within your energy envelope. So, all of these things, there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. And we've tried to address those issues. We've put out what's known as an ME/CFS health pathway. Most GPs in Australia have access to health pathways on their computers. And so there is an ME/CFS health pathway, which has already been published and is on the computers of all doctors in the state of Victoria. Right. And we're hoping that that pathway or similar pathways can go up on the computers of all of our GPs around Australia. But of course, to match that pathway, we need clinical guidelines. And clinical guidelines are really going to be at the heart and soul of what the clinical world can then embrace. And we need to remove the barriers that are currently existing in the thinking of our ministerial staff and in our representatives, government representatives, to ensure that the very tiny amount of $1.2 million is actually allocated over 2 years to developing these living clinical guidelines. It's a disgrace that they're not.
And is this part of your role to develop this?
We're just part of the movement. We represent the patient. So Emerge Australia is the national patient organisation in Australia. For people with ME/CFS, we represent the patient voice.
That's a huge job to come up with. So do you take donations? Is your company, is there anywhere where people can help and move this forward?
Absolutely. We would welcome donations. You can go onto our website, which is www.emerge.org.au, and you can find, we've just migrated our website to a new platform, so there might be some difficulty finding the donate button, but search and you'll find a button where you can donate to support our work. We would be very grateful. All donations of $2 or more are tax deductible. We have full tax deductible gift recipient status in Australia, which means we're a registered charity, and you would be supporting our work across education, advocacy, research and support. And our patient support service is our most popular service. That's our telehealth nurse service, where we have nurses not only experienced in ME/CFS, but Laura Allen, who is the manager of our patient information and support service, has ME/CFS, and she's a very senior qualified nurse. And we undertake to answer every call within 24 hours. And we need your help, the help of the public, to continue our work, because just like ME/CFS that has been left out for so long, Emerge Australia is not that well known. We're doing everything in our power to try to emerge. We've been very busy in the last 2 years digging a very solid foundation of evidence and programs to emerge as a major force. But there's a lot of noise out there in the chronic disease space. There are a lot of other very serious diseases that take all the oxygen away. And, we have been helped by the COVID epidemic. This is probably an appropriate place to say that the similarities between long COVID and ME/CFS are huge. In fact, there is evidence out there that's been published that that of the people who develop long COVID, about 40% satisfy the Canadian consensus criteria for having ME/CFS. So there are the similarities. We're not talking about people with long COVID who are in the acute phase, who end up going into intensive care on ventilators and have blood clotting disorders, etc. We're talking about the run-of-the-mill person who will get COVID and then after 3 to 6 months is diagnosed with long COVID. It's that patient cohort that are in the latest study that was published in Nature, which is a very reputable journal that have identified that of that long COVID cohort, 40% will satisfy the Canadian consensus criteria for having ME/CFS. So therein lie the similarities, the overlaps in symptoms, and in fact, I think that long COVID is a little bit of a mixed blessing for ME/CFS, because we've been able to ride on the coattails of COVID and help to raise awareness of the similarities, which have now been recognised clinically. So, there's a lot of work happening around the world on long COVID guidelines. We are hopeful that if we can get funding for Australian clinical guidelines, that there will be a harmonisation process that may well include long COVID and ME/CFS guidelines in the diagnostic criteria, which would be absolutely amazing. But that's why funding needs to go into the creation of these, and we haven't even started, because our guidelines, I go back to 2002 and nobody uses them and knows what they are.
Wow. So moving forward, look, unfortunately, some, long COVID, like you say, is a fortunate but unfortunate thing to bring more awareness to all of this. But really, sometimes it does take something else to make things happen. So look, moving forward, I really keep my fingers crossed, everything crossed, that you will be able to get the support that you need, and that anyone thinking about supporting you just goes to your website, and we'll have it at the end of our show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your time and that valuable information with us. It's really, really important. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's a pleasure. Can I say one more thing?
You sure can.
I've just remembered. In July this year, we've got a new business development team on board. We are for the first time entering teams into Run Melbourne, which is a marathon. You can run, you can walk, or you can do all of this virtually. And we want to run on behalf of people with ME/CFS, run and walk. Mm-hmm. So if any of your listeners are thinking of going on our website, you can donate. You can join Run Melbourne, you can donate, you can email your friends and family and get them to support Run Melbourne. We are wanting to raise an initial $20,000, which would be fantastic. So this is one way that we can all help to do things for people with ME/CFS who can't necessarily do it for themselves. So that's just another way.
Great idea. All right. So anyone listening, if you've got your virtual running shoes on, or you're even in Melbourne at the time, or you want to do anything like that, go on the website, check it out, and make a donation to something that is such a worthwhile thing to do. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you. That's a pleasure.
This disease can affect anyone at any stage and any age. People living with ME/CFS often feel invisible due to the unknown cause of conditions, lack of effective treatment options, and limited community awareness. Much of the time, it's the families that are caring for the ME/CFS sufferers as well as the long COVID sufferers. Now, this can range from needing partial care to being a full-time carer with no relief or help from government services in sight. Please support companies such as Emerge to continue with their current research and effort to get funding for those who are silently suffering from this terrible condition. Their work gives hope and help to more than 250,000 Australians living with the ME/CFS. You never know when this will affect someone in your life. We certainly didn't. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you leave a rating and a review. That would help others learn about this podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who is This Monster? Or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.